Picture this. Sometime in the future, you're sitting on a boat, floating above the Great Barrier Reef. Your 20-hour flight to Australia landed yesterday, and you've been counting down to this moment for the past 6 months. You slip a snorkel over your head, excited to experience the beauty of the coral reefs. But when you dive into the water, you see a much bleaker sight. Corals all around you are dead. How could this have happened, you wonder? The majority of deaths was likely due to coral bleaching. Bleaching occurs when coral gets stressed, often by low tides, overexposure to the sun, pollution, or a change in ocean temperatures. Coral rely on algae that live in their tissues for food, but when coral becomes stressed, coral expel that algae, just like when you or I throw up when we get the flu. This leaves coral without its main food source and vulnerable to disease. The expulsion of algae also leaves the coral white, since its color comes from the algae in its tissues. If a coral remains bleached for too long, it can die. Coral bleaching events are becoming more and more common. Climate change and subsequent coral bleaching have the potential to violate Articles 2, 17, 24, and 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 25 states that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food. It's estimated that 500 million people are directly reliant on food derived from reef ecosystems. Although it's difficult for scientists to estimate the exact extent to which food will become unavailable to these people, it is clear that if we do nothing to put an end to the warming of the oceans, the impact of coral bleaching will increase and put economies and food sources at risk. The right to own property and the right to leisure are also put at risk by climate change and coral bleaching. Sea level rise can increase flooding. The loss of reefs exacerbates damages because they will no longer be able to serve as an effective barrier between violent oceans and the coast. Already in Alaska, increased temperatures and erosion have caused costly damage to coastal infrastructure. Leisure time is at risk by rising temperatures and damage to ecosystems. It's much harder to enjoy a summer day if it were 122 degrees outside, which is what Earth's average surface temperature would be if 93% of the heat that greenhouse gases trap was not going into the ocean, like it does. Damage to reefs caused by high ocean temperatures may make it more difficult to experience the beauty of a healthy reef. Anyone can argue that deprivation of these rights is arbitrary and unjust, because a person whose right to property or leisure has been affected may not have done anything to contribute to climate change. Further, a majority of the people who are most reliant on reefs live in the poorest tropical nations. Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights explains that everyone is entitled to the rights listed in the document, regardless of nationality or other statuses. The truth is, coral bleaching affects poor tropical communities most. These are communities which use the reefs for food, tourism, and their economy, and even as a barrier to protect their shores from structural damage. The rights of people of lower socioeconomic status are, and will continue to be, more effective than those of wealthier classes. Article 2 also applies to the more general topic of climate change. People in poorer communities have less access to resources that can help them prepare and cope with climate-related events, like heat waves and even hurricanes. Even in Chicago, people who live on the west and south sides have the greatest exposure to toxic air pollution and other environmental health hazards. Though I emailed several professionals, nobody was able to give their time for an interview. Still, I found an interview published by Yale Environment 360. The interview featured biologist Terry Hughes, who is the director of the ARC Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies at James Cook University in Queensland, Australia. Dr. Hughes studied bleaching events in 1998, 2002, 2016, and 2017. In 2016, he and his team surveyed more than 1,000 of the Great Barrier Reef's nearly 3,000 reefs. Through aerial surveys, Dr. Hughes and his team categorized corals based off if they were bleached or not. They also put approximately 100 researchers underwater to test the accuracy of that data. According to Dr. Hughes, 55% of the reefs that were surveyed in 2016 were bleached, which is 4 times more than 2002 or 1998. When he went back in October and November in 2016, two-thirds of the coral in the northern 500 miles of the reef that were alive in March and April were dead. He called this a huge loss. Dr. Hughes also mentioned a bleaching event in 2017, which was not as bad as the one in 2016, but certainly worse than the 1998 and 2002 events. He mentioned that hot ocean water moves each year, which is bad because bleaching moves with it, causing a greater extent of the Great Barrier Reef to be damaged. Dr. Hughes expressed concern that bleaching events are becoming more frequent. Dr. Hughes said that widespread coral bleaching is a very modern issue. Mass bleaching at a large scale was unheard of until 1982 and 1983. The first global bleaching event was in 1998. He blamed pollution, overfishing, and climate change for the degradation of coral, but mentioned that for the Great Barrier Reef, the sole cause is warming waters. Dr. Hughes says there is a rapidly closing window where we still have the opportunity to address this issue. He said the best way to protect reefs is by transitioning away from fossil fuels and cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Since so much of coral bleaching is caused by warming oceans, and warming oceans are caused by heat trapped by greenhouse gases, the most effective way to prevent coral bleaching is by reducing fossil fuel use and greenhouse gas emissions. As an individual, you can eat fewer animal products, use more efficient modes of transportation, and reduce purchases and waste. Livestock accounts for roughly 14.5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions each year, which is about the same amount as the whole world's transportation sector creates. So, eating less meat and dairy reduces demand for these products and can help reduce those emissions. Try Meatless Monday if you can. Similarly, walking, biking, taking public transit, and carpooling are all more eco-friendly methods of transportation than driving solo. Also, it takes energy to create the products we consume, from the clothes on your body to the projector showing you this video. Buying less means less greenhouse gases are being emitted. One last easy thing you can do on an individual level is waste less food. Food waste in landfills produces methane, a greenhouse gas which warms the planet and our oceans. There are also bigger solutions that can be addressed through legislation. Laws and subsidies that support renewable energy over fossil fuels are a good step. City planning is also important, because energy-efficient buildings and accessible public transportation can go a long way. Between 70 and 80% of all people are expected to live in urban areas by the year 2050, so sustainability here is important. To support sustainable laws, vote. If you're not of voting age, you can advocate for green legislation by speaking with friends and family. If we fail to prevent coral bleaching and climate change, we are putting our rights and happiness at risk.